The gallery always hushed the children. Even their small shoes softened on the long runner, as if the portraits along the walls had told the very air to be still. Mary knew this hush. She had learned it as a girl on errands with her mother, when the hall was a place of errands and awe. Now she walked between James and Eliza with the Book of Common Prayer cradled against her apron, their little fingers wrapped in the cloth at her sides. They had been restless all morning. The storm had delayed the prince by a day. The nursery had floated on rumour, and the twins had tried to catch whispers the way children catch flakes at a window. Mary had turned them away from the crowded talk. She had promised a quiet half-hour. She had promised a prayer the way their mother had taught them, soft and steady, the way a heart learns to step again after it has stumbled. The chapel door yielded with a familiar press. She led them in. The dimness felt kind, like cupped hands. She set the book on the rail and struck a taper from the little flint, coaxing 3 candles to life. Their flames trembled, then held like brave little soldiers. The children watched, solemn, their breath visible in the cool air before the candles warmed it. "Hands," she murmured. James put his palms together with more force than skill. Eliza fussed with the ribbon at her locket, the small gold oval her mother had last touched. Mary straightened it and kissed the child's hair without thinking. It smelled of lavender soap and sun from the window in the schoolroom, though there had been no sun today, only winter light. "Remember?" Mary asked. Eliza nodded. James nodded too, because his sister had. He tilted his chin, imitating something he did not understand but wanted to hold. Mary opened the book. The pages were softened by years. Some corners were turned down from hurried mornings. On the flyleaf, the princess's name and the year of her marriage. The ink had faded to a pale brown that always made Mary swallow. Her hands were clean, as Aunt Beatrice had once said to her in a different season. She had let that phrase settle into her bones. She used those hands now to hold the book very still. "Our Father," she whispered. The twins followed. Their voices were little, a bit uneven. "Which art in heaven, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, hallowed be thy name." The words did not belong to Mary, and that was why she felt safe using them. She counted the breaths between phrases as the princess had taught her when the lady had lived and had been impatient with silence. "Count for them, Mary. Let them hear they have time. Let them hear it even more than they hear me." She had counted back then with a bowed head and a beating heart, a maid learning from a princess in a place where such learning was the shape of kindness. Now the twins' fingers tightened on themselves. She watched James's lashes dark against his pale cheek. She watched Eliza's mouth form each word as if it was a new bead on a new string. Mary's own heart loosened. "Give us this day our daily bread." She remembered the morning the princess had whispered this line fiercely, a day of a fever and a doctor and a low sun. The princess had laughed after the prayer, weary and sweet. "Bread is much more than bread today, Mary. Promise me you will keep a crumb of it for them if it falls." Mary had promised nothing. A maid does not promise a princess, but she had looked at the twins and decided quietly that keeping crumbs belonged to everyone. "Forgive us our trespasses." James hesitated on trespasses, his tongue struggling. Eliza pronounced it with careful dignity, eyes fixed on the page, though she could not yet read. Mary delivered the next line with her voice anchored. The candle nearest the book sputtered, then steadied. She felt the warmth on her wrist. "As we forgive those who trespass against us." The door behind them did not move. The gallery remained a hush. She did not know that anyone stood there. She did not know that a man's coat sent out a faint wet scent of snow and horse, that boots had found the quietest part of the runner, that a hand had found the lion's head latch and stayed there. She only knew the rhythm of small voices, hers underneath like a hand under a page. "And lead us not into temptation." Eliza always softened that word. Mary smoothed it for her with the evenness of her tone. James glanced up at her as if he wanted to tell her a secret in the middle of this sacred thing, and then he decided the secret could wait, because the prayer was a kind of secret too. Mary offered a count of 2, "But deliver us from evil." James whispered the last word with a small proud push. Eliza looked at her locket, and then at the candles as if checking that both were still present. "For thine is the kingdom." The book's paper rustled. Mary felt the room draw a breath with them. Sometimes, in the afternoons, She would hurry the final cadence when the twins were wiggling or the nurse was at the door with a message. Now she did not hurry. The afternoon gave them time. The whisper of the wind met the glass and moved on. The power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The sound folded itself and rested. Mary closed the book. She kept her head lowered for one more moment and then came to her feet with the children, small hands still in hers. When she turned, she saw him. The prince stood just inside the door, where a beam of the grey light fell. He had come without ceremony. His coat had travel on it. His face had travel on it too. Lines of cold and little sleep, a jaw set out of habit. His eyes undid all of that. They were not the eyes of a man returning to orders and papers. They were the eyes of a man who had found a room he had not expected. Mary's fingers tightened once before she let go of the twins and made her curtsy. It was proper, and it was a cover for the leap her heart made. She had not expected him today. She had not expected him now. She had not expected him to hear the words that did not belong to her, the words she had kept safe as if they had. "Your Highness," she said. He did not answer immediately. He looked at the locket on Eliza's chest, at James's stubborn chin, at the book in Mary's hands. She saw his mouth move and pause, as if a question had struck him and stopped there. He took one step down the aisle. His boots made a respectful sound on the stone. "Who taught you?" he asked. His voice had come from far away and had brought the cold into the syllables. It was not accusation, it was ache. "Who taught you to say it like that?" Mary folded the book to her apron, not hiding it, only holding it as if it might slip. Her answer had lived on the back of her tongue for months. "Her Highness did, sir," she said. "When they were very small, she asked for quiet. She asked me to count between the lines, so their hearts would learn calm. I only kept the thread from breaking." Eliza leaned into Mary's arm with a trust that had grown one day at a time. James shifted his weight and squared his shoulders, watching his father with an attention that mimicked the prince's own. The candles trembled in a draught and then steadied, as if ashamed. The prince looked not at Mary but at the children when he answered, as if any words must go through them to be true. "They remembered," he said, and his voice was different. He had meant to leave something else at the door, a command perhaps, a safe word that let him stay distant. It had not come with him into this room. "They remembered their mother." Mary nodded. The right thing was to make herself small inside the quiet, to let the moment belong to those three, to make sure only that the book did not fall. Her pulse settled under her apron. The heat in her face cooled. She could be a useful person in this place. She could stand in this half-light and keep the small order that children need. She could do it with clean hands. James broke the stillness first, because children are calendars more faithful than clocks. "Are we going to the stables later, Papa?" he asked. "We said the prayer." Eliza looked up at her father from under her lashes, bravely, and added, "Mary said it the way Mama did. We folded our hands." The prince's mouth eased. "We shall go," he said. "We shall do many things." He took another step. The cold left his coat as if the candles had reached it. He did not touch the children. He did not touch Mary. He looked at the book again, and then at Mary's hands. "I thank you," he said. Those were not words a prince was obliged to say to a maid. They were a man's words to a woman who had done a careful thing. Mary felt them settle over her shoulders like a shawl someone had placed there without fuss. She bowed her head and answered simply, "You are welcome, sir." The quiet filled with a warmth that was not heat. Mary could have stayed in it. She could have led the children to the pew and had them sit for one more minute, the way the princess had liked to do, to let the last phrase sink all the way to their toes. She could have let the prince decide what to do with the rest of his day and the peace that had begun to grow, but the hall has ears, wherever it has doors. The runner in the gallery did not always soften every step. The hush was not a promise, it was a pause, waiting for someone to decide whether to honor it. A footfall in the gallery, light and definite, approached the chapel. A shadow moved over the threshold. A woman's voice, smooth as milk and twice as cloying, slid over the stone. "Kept the thread, did she?" The latch clicked. Lady Honoria stepped into the chapel, as if entering a drawing room arranged for her appraisal. Her eyes took in Mary, the twins, the candlelight, the book, and then the prince, and each detail seemed to settle into a little ledger she kept behind her smile. "What an affecting picture," she said, "and how very Industrious of Miss Fletcher. Mary's hands tightened over the book. The twins sensed the shift before the words reached them. James edged behind Mary's skirt. Eliza lifted her chin in imitation of ladies at tea. The prince's expression did not change. He moved forward until he stood near the front pew. His voice was courteous and cooler than the candles. "Lady Honoria." She dipped her head to him and then to the children, as if blessing their existence. "Your return delights us all. Ravenswood breathes differently when you are at home. I am only sorry to have intruded upon what I assume must be a private practice." "It is the Lord's Prayer, my lady," Mary said before she could think to hold her tongue. "The simplest thing." Honoria's fan appeared in her hand as if conjured. She did not open it. She tapped it once against her glove, a light rebuke in kid leather. "Simplicity is the most treacherous of virtues, Miss Fletcher. It tempts us to think we may carry it anywhere. There are rooms in which even simple acts require care." Eliza moved toward Mary again, the little locket flashing. Honoria's eyes noted it and returned to the prince. "Of course, family devotions are admirable, but propriety is the proper carriage for piety, is it not? One would not wish the corridors to fill with the sort of talk that diminishes what should be revered." The chapel door opened again. Canon Albright's kind, worn face appeared in the grey light. He had come for evening prayers, having been delayed by a lame pony and a detour through half-frozen mud. He took in the scene with the habit of a man who had seen too many family matters unfold under the name of holy business. "Your Highness," he said, bowing. "Lady Honoria." He inclined his head to Mary in the next breath, and his eyes softened at the sight of the children. "Little ones, you have been busy with God's best words." "We said them as Mamma did," James informed him, authority in his small voice. Canon Albright smiled. "Then you have not gone wrong." Honoria turned, mild as milk. "Canon, you will agree that instruction of heirs should be carefully managed. There is a way in which things are done. Safely, visibly, respectably. One must not encourage presumptions." The canon tucked his hands into his sleeves, clerical and calm. "There is also a way in which children learn most easily. It is usually from the voice nearest to them. Still, my lady, I grant your concern. Order is not the enemy of devotion." Edmund looked from the canon to Honoria. He did not look at Mary, though he felt her presence the way one feels a steady light against a wall, even when one faces away. "We will not have corridors filled with talk," he said. "We will have a household that minds its business and cares for its young." Honoria's smile sharpened by a degree. "Then you will set the pattern. We will all be guided." Mary read the cue that belonged to her. She bent to the twins and spoke softly. "Time to wash hands for tea." Her voice was steady. "We will say thank you to the canon for coming, and then we will go." Eliza's hand locked around Mary's finger. James scowled, disappointed the calm had been taken from them and replaced with instructions. Canon Albright crouched a little, old joints patient. "I shall see you again, God willing, next Sunday," he said, "and any day before if you choose to say the best words again." Eliza considered this generosity, then nodded judiciously. Mary squeezed the small hand once and straightened. She turned at last to the prince. Her curtsy was deeper than the first, more formal. A thread pulled through the moment to keep it from unraveling. "With your leave, sir," she said. There was a brief hesitation. She could feel it, as if the air had paused. He could name what had happened here without naming anyone. He could protect her without even saying her name. He could do it with a sentence that said the children's peace mattered more than anyone's misgivings. He could do it with the weight of his title set lightly in her favor. She waited. He did not give her that sentence. He gave her another, neutral as a winter sky. "You may go, Miss Fletcher." The words did not strike like a blow. They settled like snow. They blurred what had been clear. Mary received them with a nod. They were the shape of protection men sometimes used, distance disguised as prudence. It was not for her to say what shape protection ought to have. She guided the twins to the door. Honoria stepped aside with airless courtesy. In the corridor, the runner breathed again under their feet, and the portraits looked on with patient eyes that had seen many small dramas wear themselves out. Mary kept the book to her chest. She did not hurry. Haste would only make the children feel chaste. "Why did Lady Honoria speak like that?" Eliza asked in a whisper that was not quite a whisper. Mary bent to her without stopping. "Because she is careful," she said. "Sometimes carefulness sounds sharp like a scissors. even when it trims only a thread. James frowned. But we did not do wrong. No, Mary said. You did not. They reached the basin. Mary washed small hands in water that had cooled. She warmed their fingers in her own, drying them softly. When she set the towel aside, she made herself breathe in a measured count. She had done the right thing in a room that did not always welcome right things from her. The rightness could stand on its own feet. Her face, steady in the small glass, would help the children to believe that. Back in the chapel, Honoria's voice went on, sugared and hard. You see, Your Highness, the smallest habits set the largest precedents. A maid today, a governess tomorrow, then some farmer's sister teaching catechism in the nursery before the month is out. I am only thinking of you, and of them. Canon Albright's breath left him in a sigh that made no sound. He regarded the prince with a kind of tired hope. Edmund's jaw tightened and then eased. Thank you for thinking, he said. I shall do the same. Canon, we will proceed with evening prayers as usual. Lady Honoria, the household will remain calm. Honoria bowed her head. Of course. The service was mercifully brief. Honoria knelt decorously. The prince bowed his head, the canon read by light that did not tremble. When it was done, Edmund lingered only long enough to speak to the canon about the lame pony and the road, and then he left by the side door. His steps were swift, as if he meant to outrun the pinch of his own words. Mary did not see him cross the gallery. She was in the nursery, placing the prayer book on the mantel where the children knew it lived. The little square of space looked more itself when the book rested there. James and Eliza had settled at the table with their biscuits and milk, their quarrel over crumbs postponed in honor of the day. Mrs. Betton poked her head in, a cap like a snowdrift above kind eyes. All is in a stir below, she said in a low voice, not wishing to rattle the cups. His lordship returned early. Lady Honoria is sharpening manners and knives. Eat, ducks, eat. Mary smiled because the children were watching. When they turned back to their plates, her smile loosened into something more difficult to carry. She moved to the window and looked out into a winter that had not yet decided whether to snow again. The glass breathed a little mist against her breath. She rubbed it with her knuckle, a small circle of clarity in a larger blur. She would be assigned tasks with more doors between herself and the twins. She could feel it coming the way one feels a draft through a seam. She would obey. That was the shape of her employment. But there were shapes within shapes. There were things a person could carry without being seen. She thought of the count between lines, the way it steadied small chests and small minds. She could carry that and give it away wherever she was allowed to stand. Downstairs, Lady Honoria did not immediately seek paper. She took tea first, because the performance of calm is often more persuasive than calm itself. She poured without spilling. She let the butler see her gratitude for the lemon, which was thin at this season. She asked after the gardener's daughter, as if recalling her name out of a crowd. She moved through the rooms like a soft brush, smoothing velvet against the grain, and then with it, leaving everything shining but different. Only then did she sit at the writing table in the small saloon that faced the east lawn. A little coal fire popped. The window reflected her, a pale oval above a pale plume of steam. She chose paper with the Ravenswood crest, because it would please the eye of the man who would receive it. She chose a pen with a nib that scratched just enough to sound like work. The inkwell gave up its black obediently. She wrote without haste. She wrote without blotting a single line. She wrote as a woman who believes that to be reasonable is to be irresistible. My lord, Ravenswood requires a steady hand in matters of the nursery. I regret to say that a maid, yes, Miss Mary Fletcher, whom you may recall as the daughter of the late village schoolmistress, has presumed to instruct the heirs in their devotions within the private chapel. The scene would have affected me, had it not suggested a dangerous precedent. Such things, if unchecked, breed confusion below stairs and laxity above. The prince returned early and found the picture himself. You have always maintained that early governance is the surest kind. I agree. Your counsel and perhaps your presence would be timely. Influences are sought, some are unworthy. She paused and then added, precise as a needle. Influence sought in the nursery. Return at once. She sprinkled sand, shook it off, and folded the paper with a neat, decisive touch. The seal lay cooling beside the candlestick, a little pool waiting for heat. She lighted the stick, softened the wax until it gleamed, and pressed the signet down with the force of a woman who did not consider herself forceful at all. The wax stamp hissed. By morning, the whisper had grown legs. It walked up and down the runners and across the slate floors. It slipped into the parlor with the tea tray. It perched on the back stair like a cat that would not be shooed. Mary felt it without hearing the words. She had carried trays long enough to know the weight of a room that wanted to be kind and preferred to be interesting. At breakfast, the twins were sugar and sparks. Mary buttered their bread with care, smoothing crumbs as if smoothing temper. Eliza sang to herself in small humming lines. James tested every button within reach. They asked whether Papa would take them to see the new colt. Mary told them he had much to do and would do it faster if the nursery gave him peace. Mrs. Betton came up with a list that looked too long for the day. From Lady Honoria, she said, apologetic, as if apology might soften ink. The laundry inventories must be gone through. Curtains counted, the East linen press. I will send Jane to sit with you here. Mary nodded and took the paper. The list did not name a punishment, it was simply practical. That was how punishments moved when people wished to seem fair. In the drawing room below, cups chimed and ladies leaned with the exact inclination that made their confidences seem accidental. Such devotion, one murmured, and her companion replied, and such presumption, and both of them smiled, as if presumption were a delicious fruit. Honoria did not lead the talk. She prodded it with the lightest touch, and then looked away as if embarrassed by the vulgarity of frankness. Canon Albright, collecting arms lists in the servants' hall, heard the story recounted by a footman who had it second-hand and richly embroidered. The canon's brow gathered and then smoothed. If we are to have a scandal, he said dryly, I would prefer it to contain at least one sin. The footman laughed and then stopped, remembering his place. By noon, Mary had been sent to the East Wing with a ring of keys, Jane at her shoulder like a nurse told to watch a child who had been near the pantry's jam. The sheets smelled of lye and winter air. Mary counted, wrote numbers, turned. She touched hem-stitches and remembered which maids had eyes good enough for tiny thread and which ones closed their fingers over mistakes. She found 2 pillowcases misfiled and replaced them. She did her work as if it mattered, because it did. It mattered whether the house rested on order. It mattered whether her hands stayed busy. When she returned at last to the nursery, the quiet had thinned. Jane had tried. Jane had failed. James's toy soldier, the wooden one with the chipped hat he loved more than the china set, lay on the floor with its leg split. Eliza had burst into tears and then refused to cry another tear for anyone. The governess, a gentlewoman who had made a gentleman's economy possible, frowned at chaos with a stomach full of bread and pride. They will not be managed, she said, as if that described the children and absolved the adults. His Highness is engaged with accounts. He cannot be troubled. Miss Fletcher, if you please. Mary crouched at once. Tears had already started to harden into a fence around James's eyes. She knew that time well. She gave it no space. Show me, she said. Show me the wrong thing. James thrust the soldier at her, as if handing over a grievance to the court. Mary turned the toy gently, cradling it, as if it could feel this care. She looked at the split, at the tiny peg that had held leg to hip. She did not scold Jane, she did not blame the governess. She said to James, "This can be mended if we are patient." Eliza had stood very still, the locket climbing and falling with her breaths. "Jane said we may not sing the prayer without the canon," she announced, fierce as a little magistrate. Mary's mouth softened in a way she could not help. "Jane was thinking of order," she said. "We will be orderly. We will have our milk, and then we will sit, and then we will find patience in the space between words the way we always do." The governess flushed. "It is not my place to regulate their pieties," she said. The words sat in the room, like an upholstered chair no one wanted to claim. "It is all of our place to regulate their breaths," Mary answered, not sharp, only level. "They cannot learn if they cannot breathe. Will you sit, Miss Lee?" Miss Lee blinked, then sat. She was a better woman than her posture suggested. Mary warmed a little glue by the nursery fire and mended the soldier while the twins watched as if surgery were being performed. She told James to blow very gently. He blew too hard. She laughed and told him to try again with less wind and more patience. He grew proud of his controlled breath. Eliza held the soldier upright while it cooled, serious as a nurse. A bent world straightened a fraction. After milk, they sat. Mary asked nothing of them for a moment, only listened to the scrape of chair legs and the winter sound against the glass. Then she said, "Hands," and the twins obeyed without the formality of a chapel and candles, because children take their sacraments where their bodies are. She did not speak the prayer itself. She asked them to count together to 4 between their inhales and exhales. She set the count with her whisper. James copied with the concentration he gave to marbles. Eliza settled the locket against her dress and followed. Miss Lee watched, the stiffness leaching out of her shoulders as if someone had opened a hidden tap. "What is that?" she asked at last. "Time," Mary said. "The kind you can hold." Miss Lee looked away toward the corridor, instinct and fear in a brief quarrel. She did not forbid it. In the afternoon, Mary was sent to the stillroom to list dwindling syrups. The bitter orange had only enough for a few more spoons. The cherry was gone. The housekeeper's ledger lay open, the neat columns receiving Mary's sums. When she looked up, her eyes found the window and the grey on the far fields, and in it she saw the prince striding across the inner court. He was speaking to the steward, head bent, hand slicing the winter air as he calculated grain and men. He did not look up. He did not look toward the nursery windows. He was a figure built of decisions. He had his reasons. She gave them to him when her mind sought to accuse. She remembered his face in the chapel and how something had gone unsteady in it. She remembered the sentence he had not given her and told herself that sentences withheld were sometimes the best protection a man could devise when other people were listening. She told herself to work. By evening, the whisper had swelled into what houses call common knowledge. The upstairs maids knew. The scullery boy knew. The coachman's wife would know by supper. None of them wished Mary harm. Some of them wished her safety from her own goodness. A maid with a heart and no caution is a hazard to her own sleep. Mary took the twins to look at the snow that had started again, clean and tentative on the terrace stones. She kept her shawl tight and tucked their hands into muffs lined with old rabbit. James pressed his nose to the glass, leaving clouds of breath. Eliza drew letters in the fog with her finger. J, then E, then M. Mary wiped them before anyone could complain about smears. A footman came up with a message. He delivered it to Miss Lee first, because she outranked Mary whether she wanted to or not. Miss Lee paled and turned to Mary. "The children are to dine below," she said, "with the family." Mary took their muffs off again. "Mind your spoons," she said. "Mind your napkins, mind your jokes. Do not make them until you know they will be welcome." Eliza rolled the locket between her fingers. "Will Lady Honoria be there?" "Yes," Mary said, and left it there. The children's courage did not need her doubts. When they had gone, the nursery felt too large. Mary tidied nothing. She sat very straight on the little chair left warm by Eliza's body and counted again for herself. She reached 4 and then began again with 1, because that is what a person does when she cannot change the air, but can change the way she breathes it. Downstairs, tea slid into dinner. Dinner slid into talk. Edmund sat at the head and did not lose his temper once. Honoria managed to never mention the chapel and to let the idea of it float through every sentence about order and the future. The twins did not spill anything. James spoke once without being asked and then said, "I beg your pardon," because Mary had taught him the survival of that phrase. Eliza folded her hands when she was not using them, because that, too, steadied a person. Afterward, in the corridor, the prince saw Mary at the turn of the stair. She had come to ask Miss Lee whether Eliza might keep her locket on through her bath. He had been coming upstairs with the steward's notes in his hand, and his mind full of numbers that refused to add correctly. They stopped at the same piece of carpet. "Miss Fletcher," he said, and the words carried the whole house behind them. "Your Highness," she answered. He looked not at her but at the step above her shoulder. This was not distance. It was the angle a man chose when he wished to speak without audience, and there were always ears. "The children did well," he said. "At dinner." "I am glad," Mary said. "They are settled," he added, and the word moved through both of them like a visible thing, because they both knew how easily that could spoil. Mary inclined her head. She ought to step back and let him pass. She did not. She took the smallest breath she could and let it out with a quiet sentence. "Sir, if there is fault to be found, Let it be laid on my back only. He looked at her then. He did it for less than a heartbeat, but it was long enough for her to see tiredness and a kind of gratitude that could not cross the space between them. He nodded once, the memory of a bow. "Good evening, Miss Fletcher," he said. "See that you rest." She did not rest. She sat in the narrow chair by the nursery hearth while Miss Lee oversaw the baths, and she mended a seam in James's cuff with stitches so small she had to stop every fourth one and blink. She kept the steady rhythm because her hands had learned steadiness in harder rooms than this. She let the crackle of the fire be the only music. When Eliza came out with her hair damp and her lashes spiked, Mary dried the hair with a towel that had more years than the child and combed it with the patient comb. She set the locket back against the small chest. Eliza touched it, satisfied. When at last the small bodies grew heavy and the room's noises sank, Mary rose and put the prayer book back in its place because places matter. She turned toward the door with a mind that had no space for anything but sleep and the next list. A soft cough interrupted her step. It came from the corridor. Mrs. Betton stood there with a tray she had no need to carry herself. She had brought it as a pretext. On it lay a folded cloth covering a slice of bread and a wedge of cheese that someone had thought to spare. And beside them a thing that did not belong in the nursery at all. "For you," the housekeeper said, keeping her voice low so that rest would not break on a silly noise. "From the prince's valet by his instruction," he says, "but I think he has added that on the chance you will refuse it unless it looks like a duty." Don't argue with an old woman. Mary did not reach for the food. She reached for the package that lay beside it, wrapped in oilskin against damp and tied with a narrow ribbon she knew. It was silk, the exact blue of the twins' curtains. The parcel was oblong and weighed like paper and maybe something harder. Mrs. Betton watched her, satisfaction behind her eyes. "He said it was from the archives," she added. "I think the past would like to speak." Mary untied the ribbon with fingers that had kept themselves from trembling all day and could not keep themselves now. The oilskin gave way to a bundle of journals bound in worn calf and a brass key taped to the inside cover with a strip of old paper. On the flyleaf in a hand Mary recognized were words that made her breath stop in the middle, the late princess's notebooks and a narrow brass key wrapped in her ribbon. Mary did not sleep. The journal smelled faintly of beeswax and old lavender. The ribbon kept its shape from years in a drawer where gentle hands had folded gentle things. She set the bread on the hearth stool without tasting it, lifted the first notebook, and opened to a page where the ink had flowed like a voice speaking quickly to outrun a fear. James breathed evenly in his bed. Eliza murmured once and rolled. The room made its small night noises, familiar as a lullaby. Mary read by the coal's glow and a candle stub saved for mending. The handwriting was the princess's, long, elegant, a few impatient smudges where emotion had outrun care. Michaelmas. James coughed again. "Albright says it is nothing, but I thought of the winter his father was ill at sea and my hands shook like leaves. I taught them the prayer with breath between the lines. Calm, I said to myself, as if I were my own nurse. Mary's eyes moved over days and weeks that remembered tiny things. Eliza's first attempt at curtsy, James's stubbornness with a boot, the taste of a pear too cold from the larder. The writing never named a servant unkindly. It remembered the gardener's dog, but forgot the names of baronets who had come and bored. Between the lines, Mary heard laughter that had not been heard in the nursery since. Then a different tone, tight and precise, crept into the hand. Ashcombe called again. He is too sure of himself, which means someone is too sure of him. He speaks of influence as if it were a ribbon one ties to a child's wrist. Edmund says there are currents I cannot feel because I am a woman. I say there are currents he cannot feel because he has been taught not to. Albright is steady. I will put something where no one looks. Mary turned the page and found the words that snared her breath. If I am called home before they are men and women, let a woman with clean hands guide them in prayer. Let the priest guard the doctrine and the father guard the world. Let a gentler voice guard the hour before sleep. Clean hands. Mary pressed her own together without meaning to. She could hear Aunt Beatrice's voice, years old, telling a girl who thought only of linen and stairs that hands could be clean in more than one way. She read on. There was talk of the hidden godfather, named only by initial. M, or was it A, and the flourish had slid like a bird. He wishes to be necessary. He will offer money where it looks like kindness. He will ask for keys he should not have. I have asked Albright to witness a paper. I have put a key where even Edmund will not look because he thinks me too tender to hide things." Mary looked at the key lying in the gutter of the notebook, taped there with a strip of paper whose corners had browned. Brass narrow with a notch at one end and a bite at the other. She had not seen its like among the household rings. The strip of paper held a line in the princess's hand. Lectern. The candle guttered, recovered, and sent up a steady flame as if heartened by the word. Mary closed the journal and held it to her chest. Gratitude and sorrow beat with the same pulse and made her eyes sting. She thought of the prince's face when he had seen his children's hands. She thought of Honoria's smile shaped like a rule. When dawn slid like a paler ribbon across the nursery curtains, Mary wrapped the journals again and tied the ribbon with a care that made her hands slow. She tucked the brass key into her apron pocket, weight against her, a truth waiting. She did not go to the chapel yet. She had learned the cost of being seen in the right place at the wrong hour. She waited for day to become busier and people to forget to watch. First she took the twins to the schoolroom, because that too was duty. Miss Lee had slept in her smaller bed as if, having done nothing all day, had used her up. She greeted the children with a weak smile that did not reach her eyes and wrote sums for James and letters for Eliza. The letters were shaky lines today. Mary did not scold. She held Eliza's hand once and then let go so the child could find her own straightness. When the bell rang for the servants' breakfast, Mary slipped down the back stairs and out the door that led to the winter garden. The air bit and cleared her thoughts. Hoarfrost laced the dead rose canes. A robin disagreed with the season from a thorn bush and hopped without sense of anyone's rank. Aunt Beatrice was already there, wrapped in a shawl the colour of ash and tied under her chin with a knot that would have shamed a lady's maid. She walked slowly, which made people think she was weak. It was how she had seen whole generations lose their tempers and their arguments. She stopped when she saw Mary, then came to her with a face that neither pitied nor hoped too much. "You are up early and heavy with something," she said. "If you were a girl of mine, I would make you sit and pour it out." Mary smiled because it was impossible not to. "I am not a girl of anyone's," she answered, not resentful, only stating what she had taught herself to believe. Aunt Beatrice snorted with approval. "Good. God keeps better girls than we do. Walk with me." She slipped her arm into Mary's as if their stations had never been arranged by anyone's table plan. "I hear the hall is full of kindness made sharp. I hear your name in mouths that cannot pronounce mercy." Mary looked down at the frosted gravel. "I did not mean to do a large thing," she said. "I did only a small one." "That is what makes it large," Aunt Beatrice replied. "A small rightness done without fuss is the most subversive thing a woman can do in a house that worships appearances." She patted Mary's hand, feeling the tremor there. "Breathe. Your hands are clean. Whatever they accuse you of, keep them clean." Mary swallowed. The words met others in her mind and locked hands. She had dreamed of this sentence before hearing it. "What if they say I presumed?" "They will," Aunt Beatrice said. "Let them. Presumption in their language is often another word for courage in ours. Be careful, not cowed." She lifted her chin toward the chapel, whose small apse showed above the yew hedge. "And if you carry any key that is not yours, give it to the person who can open the right door with it. Do not be found with keys in your pocket. Not in these days." Mary's fingers closed around the brass in her apron. "I have something," she said. "The princess left it for him. She left words too. She wrote of a man who wishes to feel necessary. She called him a godfather who hides himself." Aunt Beatrice's mouth lost its softness. "Of course she did. They travel in pairs, those men, piety and appetite, so that you cannot pull one without being told you harm the other." She sighed out a fog that rose and dissolved. "Give it to Edmund." Mary looked startled enough to make herself smaller. "To His Highness?" "To the man," Aunt Beatrice corrected quietly. "He was not built for intrigue. He was built for order and constancy. If you do not give him the tool, he will choose the wrong weapon out of habit. He will fight a whisper with a silence and call it prudence, and you will be left to drown in people's good sense." She stopped walking and faced Mary full. "You loved her." Mary did not try to pretend otherwise. "Yes, so do I," Aunt Beatrice said. "We will not let her be undone by anyone's neatness. Come." They crossed the frost. The chapel door had been left unbarred because the canon came early on Thursdays to prepare his lessons for the village children. The nave held the morning in cupped hands. Candle stubs waited for evening. Mary stood in the aisle and felt the old steadiness settle over her shoulders again, as if it had been hung there like a shawl. She wrote lectern, Mary said. Aunt Beatrice nodded toward the carved oak that stood at the front, its side panel plain to any eye that looked at it for ornament rather than purpose. Well then, Mary approached and ran her fingers along the seam. It had never caught her notice until the word had put light around it. Her hand slipped into her pocket and closed on the key. It lay warm now, warmed by her body, as if glad to be useful. She looked at Aunt Beatrice. Find him, the older woman said. Let his hand turn it. A woman can keep a secret alive. A man must pull it into air if it is to change a room. Mary nodded. Her heart did not leap. It pushed steadily against her ribs as if reminding her it had work to do. I will fetch him. But the prince found her first. He stepped in through the side door where an unassuming man can enter without being announced. He carried himself as if sleep had been a negotiator he had failed to bribe. He stopped when he saw Mary and Aunt Beatrice at the front. His eyes went at once to the woman who had raised him, because men who want to do right always look first at the person who taught them what rightness feels like. Aunt, he said, and the word softened the room. Miss Fletcher. Aunt Beatrice did not bow. She never overfed a man's rank. Your wife left a knot for you to untie, she said. Mary holds the end of the string. Mary reached into her pocket and brought out the key. She did not carry it toward him like an offering. She carried it like a fact that wanted to be placed in the right hand. He held out his palm. The brass lay in it with a weight that was larger than it looked. Mary saw the moment when he recognized the princess's ribbon. Where? He asked. Mary lifted her chin toward the lectern. She did not speak in the chapel voice this time. She spoke as a person giving instructions to someone who needed them. Here, she wrote it. He moved to the panel, bent, and found the seam with soldiers' fingers that had learned to search a map, and a man with the same care. Aunt Beatrice watched his profile without blinking, as if the act of looking could guard the act of choosing. Before you open it, she said, know that what you read may oblige you to be braver than you like. Decide now. He stilled. The pause was the kind that shows whether a man's quiet is made of fear or of thought. He lifted his head and looked from Aunt Beatrice to Mary, and then to the narrow windows that made thin ladders of light on the floor. I am already obliged, he said simply, by two small voices and by hers. He set his hand to the panel. Mary saw a line in his jaw ease at last, like a rope loosening when a knot learns what it is. He examined the side of the lectern and then found near the base a tiny hole the size of a sparrow's eye. He touched the key to it. It fit. The brass slid into place with a small sound that lived only in that room at that moment. The lock yielded with a dry whisper, and a panel no wider than a hand swung inward. Inside lay a shallow niche lined with faded velvet. On the velvet were two things: a folded paper sealed with beeswax impressed by the small seal the princess had used for her private notes, and a slip of ledger paper, the edges rubbed soft, bearing a figure and a name. Edmund did not reach for them at once. He stood very still, as if the room might instruct him how to move. Then he put his fingers to the sealed letter with a care that made Aunt Beatrice look away for a heartbeat. He turned it and traced the impression. The wax held the tiny device of a sprig, her choice when she wanted to mark something tender, not official. Open it, Aunt Beatrice said, but her voice was gentle. She had been there the day he placed his wife's ring in the small velvet box. She recognized hands that remembered. He slid his thumb under the fold and lifted. The wax gave with a clean break, as if it had waited to surrender to this touch and no other. The paper unfolded and released the scent of lavender that lived in the princess's clothes and hair, and that the nursery still remembered when the light fell a certain way. The handwriting was unmistakable. He read aloud, because some sentences must be carried by more than one set of lungs if they are to be born. To my husband and to Canon Albright, should I be gone when this is found, he began, and the breath stopped a fraction in his chest before it went on. If I am called home before our little ones are men and women, let Mary Fletcher, the daughter of the schoolmistress, and a woman with clean hands, guide them in prayer in the nursery and at the hour before sleep, as she has done in my hearing. Let the canon guard doctrine, and Edmund guard the world. Let a gentler voice keep their hearts from breaking. This I ask not as a rule, but as a mother's request. It is witnessed by the canon, who knows my mind, and I write it without guile. The ink had blotted once at the word hearts. Edmund touched the edge of the page where the blot had dried into a small darkness, and then looked at the bottom where Canon Albright's steady hand had written his name as witness. The date was there, clear, 1 year and some months before the princess died. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they had steadied. He had been raised to believe that love did not belong in paper. He saw now how it could be folded there and still breathe. He lifted the second slip. It was a small ledger note in a hand that belonged to the estate steward. It read, "Donation pledged by Ludiv. Ashcombe to Village School and Chapel Fund. Condition guidance of heir's instruction be entrusted to his recommended man. Amount 100 guineas per annum, to be considered." Aunt Beatrice's mouth thinned. "There," she said, "benevolence with a leash." Mary felt the heat rise into her face despite the cold chapel. She did not reach for either paper. She stood with her hands clasped, but her shoulders loosened as if someone had cut a stay in a dress that had been fitted too tight. It was not triumph. It was relief joined to a grief that had learned a new shape. Edmund slid the letter back into its fold, and then slid it again, because his fingers needed to move, while his mind fitted itself to his next breath. He put both papers inside his inner coat pocket, as a man puts a map where he can reach it even if the road turns. He looked at Mary, not past her. "She wrote your name," he said. The words carried neither surprise nor apology. They carried recognition. "She wrote that you should guide them." Mary found that she had no words that did not sound like presumption even to her own ear. She could only answer with the simplest truth, available to a person with clean hands. "I will do as she asks, sir, if I am permitted." Aunt Beatrice made a small approving sound. "And if you are not permitted," she added for Edmund, "you will still be obliged, and not only by the dead." Edmund's mouth shifted. "I am obliged," he said again, and the sentence sat on his tongue as if it had awaited its chair. The door near the vestry creaked. Canon Albright stepped in, brushing snowflakes from his shoulders. He stopped at the sight of the open panel and the two women and the prince's face and smiled a little, a tired joy that had nothing of triumph in it. "Ah," he said, "she kept better secrets than any of us. May I?" Edmund handed him the letter. He read quickly and nodded, the memory of the day he witnessed the writing flickering through his eyes. "She made me swear to keep my mouth until paper could speak," he said. "I am glad to be relieved of my oath." Edmund exhaled. "We will read it again before others," he said, "and I will ask you to stand with me, not yet." He looked at Mary. "Will you walk with me, Miss Fletcher? The schoolroom needs inspecting. There are matters to be set in order." Aunt Beatrice bit the inside of her cheek to keep it from smiling like a girl's. Canon Albright pretended to study the carpentry of the lectern. Mary dipped her head. "As you wish, sir," she said. The winter garden had thawed to a sheen where the sun caught it. They walked where the gravel was less treacherous. He did not offer his arm, she did not take it. This was not because either of them wished to obey every smallest rule. It was because the house had windows, and the garden had eyes, and both of them wished to arrive at the schoolroom without the wrong kind of talk. "Miss Lee manages?" he asked, as if this were a tour of chalk and slates and not a movement of ground under their feet. "She manages," Mary said. "She does not yet know how to breathe for them when they cannot. She could learn. She is not unkind." He nodded. "Teach her to count," he said, and then half smiled because the words sounded foolish and were exactly right. "Teach her to count between lines. I will not have my children held upright by fear of being seen." A robin scolded them, and then softened into a song as if apologizing. Mary let that small sound carry her courage to the next sentence. "They slept," she said, "after last night. The count helped. The soldier's leg has mended too." He glanced at her with a sudden boy's gratitude that surprised them both. "You do large things that look like small ones," he said. "That is why they make noise in the wrong mouths." They reached the schoolroom door. He opened it and stood aside without ceremony. He had to duck his head. He had always been a fraction too tall for these thresholds built for earlier men. Inside, Miss Lee had arranged sums and letters with stern neatness. The fire had been coaxed into a brave blaze by a footman who liked the twins more than he liked the thought of the upstairs frowns. Mary moved through the space as one who knows the corners and the squeak of the third board from the hearth. She lifted a slate and checked a string of numbers, smiled at a sensible mistake and set it down. Edmund watched the way the room breathed differently with her in it. He did not look at her hands. He looked at the line of her back where resolve had built itself without anyone's permission. He saw then, near the windowsill, a small metal glint. He reached for it and found a thimble, plain and slightly dented, the size of Mary's finger. He held it up. "Yours," he said. She reached to take it and hesitated. He stepped closer and placed it in her palm, more carefully than a man places such a small thing. Her fingers closed around it with an accidental brush of his skin. He felt heat run along the small place where they had touched, and he did not tell himself a sensible story about it. He put his hand back at his side with discipline that had nothing to do with cold. "Thank you," she said. She smoothed the thimble with her thumb as if it were a token with value beyond tin. He looked out through the glass to keep himself from looking too long at her. The frost had begun to draw back, showing the dark earth of the beds. "We will need a better tutor for Latin," he said, too brisk for one sentence, and then softer for the next. "And we will keep the hour before sleep, as she asked." "We will," Mary answered. She did not add, "God help us." She did not need to. It was implied in the hour. He turned toward the door. "I will speak to Honoria," he said, "and to the canon." He paused, then allowed himself one clumsy honesty. "I failed you yesterday. I chose the wrong safety." She shook her head once. "You chose to count out loud today," she said, "and that will teach the house a new measure." He bowed his head. The gesture was not to her rank. It was to the sentence. They left the schoolroom together with 2 feet of careful distance between them. The corridor caught their reflections and held them apart as if to spare them both. At the turn, his cloak snagged on the latch of a chest. Mary reached without thinking and freed it. Her fingers straightened the fold where the wool had creased. He said nothing. He felt the way soldiers feel when someone ties a bandage and then steps away before thanks can make it awkward. By the time they reached the main stair, the house was beginning to bustle around a new piece of news that had not yet reached them. A footman hurried past with a tray and a face that wished to be blank. He failed. Edmund stopped him with a word. "What is it?" The footman balanced the tray and his courage. "My lord, the invitations for the Thanksgiving Mass have gone out as Lady Honoria ordered, to give thanks for the safe return and the children's health. We are to receive guests from town." He swallowed. "Lord Ashcombe has accepted." The next days folded themselves into preparations, as if a household could outrun discomfort by polishing silver hard enough. Honoria oversaw the laying of fires and the pinching of napkins into fans that sat at attention on the plates. The footmen practiced the exact angle of their bows. The cook grew short-tempered with currents that refused to behave. Mary moved through it all as one more needed pair of hands, invisible in the way useful things often are. The twins were as bright as small larks the morning the first carriages rolled into the court. James pressed his forehead to the window and smudged it. Eliza counted wheels until her numbers tangled, and she laughed. Mary smoothed their collars and kept their curiosity from spilling over. "Who will come?" James asked. "People who have opinions," Mary said, fastened Eliza's ribbon, and kissed the child's hair before she could tell herself not to. Downstairs, Aunt Beatrice took her seat by the fire with the air of a general who has chosen the best ground and will not be moved. Canon Albright stood near the window, rubbing his hands to keep chilblains from claiming him. Honoria took the place that let her see every door and every person who came through it before they were aware. The prince remained out of sight for the precise amount of time that allowed anticipation to do part of his work. The Beecham sisters arrived first, high colour and higher feathers. After them, a string of London acquaintances whose names would be remembered only as long as their bonnets. The room filled with the sound of good breeding, compliments, surprise expressed at the right pitch, concern for roads, the weather, the reform bill, and whether children ought to be aired before noon. Then the last carriage, the only one that mattered, entered with a softness that did not match its weight. Lord Ashcombe had a talent for being present, as if he had been there all along. He did not rush himself into a room. He allowed it to notice him. He cut the figure of a man who had eaten well on other men's caution and had not paid for it with indigestion. His coat was the precise black that consoles the eye. His smile was the precise warmth that insults the heart. "Ravenswood," he said to Edmund when the prince came forward at last, tall and controlled. "The country agrees with you. It is good to see a house inhabited by its soul again." Edmund did not bow more than necessary. "Ashcombe, welcome." "Lady Honoria," Ashcombe continued, taking the gloved hand offered him and making a neat shape of gratitude over it. "You keep a standard no London prince's house could maintain." Honoria gave the smallest acknowledgement a human face can manage and still be called a response. "You are kind." Mary kept to the edge of the room as she had learned to do when carriages brought people who could harm by accident. She had brought the children down for a greet and retreat. Eliza held her hand. James held Mary's dress and stood straight the way he thought a soldier might. Honoria saw them and lifted her chin, and Mary knew in an instant that she would not be allowed to retreat as quickly as she had hoped. "Miss Fletcher," Honoria called sweetly across conversation, "come nearer. The children must be presented to our friends. Lord Ashcombe, you remember the little Ravenswoods." Ashcombe turned, and his eyes registered Mary before they registered the children. He covered that misstep with expertise. He bent to James and Eliza with a gravity that was perfectly judged. "Little lord." "Little lady," Eliza curtsied, a small gravity of her own. James bowed as if the motion were a trick he would improve by practice. Ashcombe straightened. "They carry their mother in their faces," he said to Edmund, and for the first time his voice sounded like a true thing that had escaped him. Then he tucked feeling back into his pocket. "It is precisely because of that sweetness that we must be careful with the impressions we allow them. The nursery is the antechamber to the throne. The nursery is the antechamber to conscience," Edmund answered quietly. Honoria's fan appeared. She raised it, then lowered it, then let it rest. "We all agree," she said, meaning nothing of the sort. "Miss Fletcher has been very attentive." Mary had not wished to be called upon to speak in this room. She did what she always did when she had no desire to be seen. She made herself simple and precise. "I attend to what I am given," she said. "Just so," Ashcombe replied. His eyes passed over the locket at Eliza's throat and made a note. "And it is my particular burden to attend to what is not seen. The state takes an interest in certain matters, even when they are very small. Devotion, for instance, influence, the shaping of a mind." Canon Albright had been tracing a pattern on the window pane with a dry finger, while the talk warmed. Now he turned, the patience on his face seasoned with humor. "I had not known the state wished to guard a child's bedtime," he said mildly. "I shall be glad to have help with my evening rounds." Ashcombe inclined his head to the Canon, with a deference that was almost convincing. "You have my profound respect, Canon. It is precisely the spiritual welfare of the little ones that concerns me. I am acquainted with certain men in the diocese who would like to have their names on the lips of the future," Aunt Beatrice said, not looking up from the embroidery she had taken up as if to occupy her hands while she decided whether to throw the hoop. Ashcombe smiled without moving his mouth. "We are all ambitious for the good, madam." The prince stepped half a pace nearer to Mary and the children, a distance that would look like nothing to anyone not looking. Mary felt it like a door eased nearer in a draught. He said deliberately, "The late princess expressed her mind on this matter." Honoria's fan fluttered. "Did she? How touching. We all had our sentiments. Sentiments are thread, governance is cloth." Canon Albright's eyes went to Edmund's coat pocket and back. His mouth was very still. Mary felt the twins lean toward her as if the air were pulling at them. She pulled nothing back. She only steadied their hands with hers. Ashcombe made it easy for Edmund to keep his silence. That was his skill. He gestured as if he were tired and magnanimous about it. "We will not labor, gentlemen, with ladies' anxieties," he said. "We will move by way of custom. To guard all parties against misunderstanding, I have brought a small instrument which will ease minds in the parish and beyond." Honoria's smile brightened half a shade. "How thoughtful." He produced a packet from the inner pocket of his coat. It was folded parchment bound in a red ribbon tied without haste. He held it as if it had no weight and considerable consequence. He did not yet offer it to Edmund. He turned instead to Mary, because that is how men like him make their point. "You must forgive our concern, Miss Fletcher," he said, his voice capable of sympathy it did not feel. "You will see that it is not directed at you, but at the shape of things. The right voice in the right room, that is all." Surely you would not wish to stand where a gentlewoman or a man of the cloth ought to stand." Mary did not answer. She had stored up sentences for such a moment, without ever expecting to have to spend them. They all felt wrong now, too proud, too humble, too ready to be misunderstood. She found the only one that did not choke her. "I wish the children to have peace," she said. "Precisely." Ashcombe turned to Edmund at last. He lifted the packet so that the room could see the ribbon and recognized the colour as official. "I have here a petition for proper ecclesiastical oversight of the heirs," he said, holding it out to the prince. Night laid itself over Ravenswood with a kind of busy hush, the way a mother lays a blanket and then goes on mending by the fire. The petition had been shown and admired for its ribbon. No one had asked too loudly what it might bind. By supper, the talk had settled into a story about order returning to a house that had let feeling come too near its nursery. It was a story people liked, because it made them feel both tender and correct. Mary finished the children's bread and milk without letting her hands falter. James tested the petition's new word on his tongue and forgot it halfway through. Eliza asked if a ribbon could keep words from falling out. Mary told her that some ribbons were for binding, and some were for beauty, and some were for show, and that there were better questions for bedtime. She braided Eliza's hair more gently than usual, as if the child's scalp could feel what Mary would not let touch her face. When the nurse came to lift the twins into their nightshirts, Mrs. Betton appeared with the purposeful tread of a woman who will not let foolishness stand at a door and call itself sense. She set down a basket of folded linens that did not need to be folded, and closed the nursery door with an economy that warned anyone listening on the landing to go away and mind their own souls. "Look at me," she said to Mary, not unkind, not soothing. No flinching. Mary obeyed because the command came like a rope to hold, rather than a hand to push. "I am looking." "They will come with neat words and smile their teeth at you," Mrs. Betton said, "and say they have only the house at heart. I have put houses at heart for 30 years, and they are ungrateful patients. Do not let them decide the shape of yours." Mary felt the pressure in her chest ease, the strange feeling of a garment let out by an invisible seamstress. "I have their letter," she said in a whisper, because the twins were within breath's length and the walls remembered to listen. "Her letter. The princess wrote my name." Mrs. Betton's eyes brightened with the quick wet of relief that is not quite tears. "Then they have already lost," she said, "but losing people are the noisiest kind at night." Footsteps came along the corridor. The housekeeper's mouth went flat. And here they are. The door opened without a knock, because women like Honoria believed that knocking paid compliments to people who did not require them. She entered with a smile gentle enough for nursery air and cold enough for a pantry shelf. Behind her stood Jane, much improved by mortification, bearing nothing at all to do with the errand. Honoria did not look at the beds. She did not look at the toys on the shelf. She looked at Mary as one looks at a scuff on a floor that will catch on a hem. "My dear Miss Fletcher," she said softly, "how weary you must be. We all are, after a day of attention." Mary folded her hands before her, the old habit of her mother in the schoolroom. "The little ones are asleep," she said. Almost Honoria returned, as if disagreeing about a clock's minute count proved her authority. "I will be brief. You have been very present of late. Presence can be a virtue, in proportion. It can also create misunderstandings." She folded her fan, unfolded it, and tapped the edge against her palm. "I have taken the liberty of arranging things in a way that will spare everyone embarrassment." Mrs. Betton shifted her weight, a sound like a barrel settling. "And what way is that, my lady?" A flicker of irritation crossed Honoria's face at being addressed by someone who did not wear silk. She softened it into tolerance. "Miss Fletcher will take a few days below stairs," she said, "to quiet the talk. She will see to the East Linen Press, which so often escapes our attention. After the Thanksgiving Mass, we will review arrangements for the children's devotions in a manner consonant with custom and comfort." She turned her head toward Mary as if baptism were being offered. "I am certain you will wish to support the family's peace." Mary felt her heart beat once, hard, and then collect itself. "If the canon reads a paper I have seen," she said, and she felt Mrs. Betton's head whip toward her in astonishment she disguised as a cough. "The family's peace may ask something different of me." Honoria's lips did not thin. That would have been real. They arranged themselves into generosity. "Ah, the little caches of the sentimental. I have always admired how people who prefer feeling to prudence hide their wishes in cupboards and behind panels. They are charming. Alas, charms do not govern houses. Mrs. Betton's patience broke its leash enough to growl. Her Highness governed this house with more kindness than any ledger I ever saw. Kindness is a ribbon, Honoria answered sweetly. It goes very well with the proper dress. It is not the dress. She moved a step nearer to Mary and lowered her voice without lowering its reach. If you love those children, as I am told you do, you will spare them by sparing us. Do not stand where you cannot stand without ugliness. By dawn, Miss Fletcher, I would have the key to the nursery closet on my desk and your work basket in the linen room. That is all. She turned and left, bringing the cold with her. Jane hovered, wanting to apologize to someone but lacking courage to choose. Mrs. Betton shooed her with a look. The door closed. The room widened without moving. Mary kept her face plain until the footsteps had died. Then she reached for the back of the nearest chair and let her fingers hold wood. The pressure steadied the tremor. She looked at Mrs. Betton with the plainness of a woman who will not disguise anything in front of the person who has just saved her life with a few sentences. I will pack a small bundle, she said, so that if they come at dawn they will not see me scramble. Mrs. Betton snorted again, this time with something like approval. Pack nothing you cannot carry in one hand, she advised, and put the other hand on the banister. That is how a woman keeps her balance when fools jump on the stairs. Mary went to the corner where her basket lived. Her scissors, her mending thread, the small thimble that had returned to her like a promise, and she set aside what she could leave, without feeling as if she were abandoning an arm. She wrapped her spare cap in a handkerchief and tucked inside it the tiny shell James had given her from the seaside trip of 2 summers ago, a thing he did not know he had given because he had left it on a chair cushion and she had kept it from the fire. She put in Eliza's first ribbon, the faded blue one with the frayed edge. She left the thick stockings because someone else would need them when the frost grew cruel. She did not touch the journals. They were not hers to tuck away. The brass key lay in the pocket of her apron like a live creature. She pressed her palm over it and felt it answer only with the steadiness of metal. Down the corridor, laughter rose and fell and broke into shards as the dining room emptied into parlours. The Beecham sisters giggled at some tale of a gentleman's horse and a hedge. A gentleman told the Reform Bill to sit and behave. Servants moved with the grace of people who knew where conversation needed fresh coals. The house had its noise on. Behind it, a different sound worked, a hum of rumour, a mutter of certainty, the purr of decision dressed as care. Canon Albright stood in the shadow of the west passage and waited for Edmund, because there are hours when a priest may do more with a hand on a man's sleeve than with a sermon. Edmund came sooner than he had hoped, his face drawn a little with the effort of smiling without using his heart. Canon, the prince said, I thought you would be asleep. I thought you would not, the canon answered. He kept his voice low. He means to do more than shuffle the nursery furniture. There is talk of guardianship, of oversight written into letters that travel farther than gossip. A petition is one thing. A packet delivered to the diocese with a purse attached is another. Edmund's mouth tightened. He has already tried it once, he said. He put his hand to his inner pocket and felt the letter there as one feels a pulse on a wrist. He will not like the answer he receives, but he will have it. Albright nodded. Be bold early, if you mean to be at all. Men like him do not waste time. They collect it from cowards and spend it against them. I remember. Edmund's eyes went past the canon to the far end of the corridor, where the portraits watched the rooms live the same hour they had watched 100 times. He had been that boy in the frame once, the one who thought people told the truth because they were civilized. He was not that boy now. Thank you. Do not thank me, the canon said softly. Thank the woman who left you a way to tell the truth with paper. They parted without shaking hands. It was not how men in a house like this behaved. It was how men careful of the wrong eyes kept their good sense from being used against them. In the nursery, Miss Lee gathered the last damp towels and laid them on the wooden horse near the hearth to steam themselves drier. Mary wrapped her small bundle in an old shawl tied at the corners. She laid the bundle where she could catch it up with a single motion. She checked the window latches, because checking small things gives a person the sensation of command when larger things move like weather. Eliza stirred and sighed. Mary went to her and stood long enough to see the sigh sink. James threw off a blanket and grabbed it back without waking. Mary spared him the embarrassment of help and only straightened it when his hand went slack. Mrs. Betton put her hand on Mary's shoulder. "Sleep 2 hours," she ordered. "Then wake and wash your face. If you cannot manage rest, lay down your body and arrange your mind, so it will be less angry in the morning." "I will sit in the chair and snore so they think I am you and leave you be." Mary smiled without making sound. "You are a holy woman, Mrs. Betton." "I am a profane one who knows the value of snoring," the housekeeper said, and settled her bulk in the chair in a way that would have made young maids adore her if they had been allowed to see it. Mary did not sleep. She lay on the smaller bed and watched the shadow the chair cast on the ceiling, listening to the soft, deliberate breathing Mrs. Betton produced with the skill of a woman determined to sound like furniture. Every time Mary's mind reached for fear, she made it count to 4 and begin again. When the count failed, she reached for the next thing and the next. She listed the herbs in the still room, the names of the horses in the stable, the lines of the prayer that had steadied more hearts than hers. When the clock below chimed 11, she rose and washed her face from the pitcher, quickly, so the cold could not decide to settle in her bones. She put on her shawl and took the bundle in one hand and the prayer book in the other. She stood a moment and looked at the sleeping children. She did not kiss them. That belonged to their mother, and to mornings that did not have edges. Mrs. Betton's eyes opened at once. "Go where you mean to," she said, and let them close again, the breathing returning as if she had never broken it. Mary went. The corridor let her pass without complaint. The servant's stare took her feet and returned them to her quietly. The house, having been busy for hours, had settled into the soft growl of a great animal fed and content to dream. She crossed the back hall and opened the door to the winter garden. The air bit and cleaned. Stars pricked through the thin clouds like truths that had learned to be sharp. She followed the yew hedge toward the chapel. Frost made the path a little treacherous. She knew where the gravel held and where it slid. Her breath ran ahead of her and disappeared. The chapel door gave under her hand. She stepped into darkness that knew her and did not ask for a name. She meant to kneel in the last pew, to say nothing and everything with the count that had entered her bloodstream. She meant to leave the book on the rail and to go back with less fear of morning. A small light burned near the front, a single candle cupped by a palm that protected it from drafts. She stopped, and her heart, which had kept time like a metronome all evening, missed a measure. He was there already, standing by the pew where the princess had liked to sit, the candle's flame making his face look younger and more tired. He turned at the sound she had not made, as if the room had told him she had come. He held the candle in one hand and the folded letter in the other. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked relieved, which is not the same thing. He held the candle lower so the light would not strike her eyes, and he set the folded letter on the pew as if he meant to keep from putting it back in his pocket too quickly. "I could not sleep," he said. "Nor I," Mary answered. Her voice came out even. The chapel lent her that. He nodded toward the front, and they moved without speaking until they stood near the step where the rail met the aisle. The candle cast one small, stubborn circle. Beyond it, the dark felt kind. "I did a coward's thing yesterday," he said, and his words surprised her not because of what they confessed, but because of the plain way he let them stand. "I thought distance would protect you. It only hurt you, and did not protect you at all." Mary had stood all day under words that wished to be rules. She had not expected apology. She did not know what to do with it, except place it where other truths lived. "You held more than one care in your hand at once," she said. "That is heavy. Sometimes heaviness makes a person put it down wrong." He looked at her with a sudden helplessness that made him younger by years. "If I were a better man, I would not have asked you to bear the weight of my wrong placing. If you were a worse one, you would not see where you set it," she said. "We live with the men we have, not the men we imagine. You are the man we have." He made a sound that could have become a laugh if the room had not reminded them what laughter means and when it can be spent. He lifted the candle and set it in a little iron socket near the rail. The flame took its new place and burned a fraction steadier. "The house is a net," he said. "Honoria pulls one thread and 20 shift. Ashcombe has used his quiet to arrange a louder thing. The canon says they mean to write themselves into the children's days and call it piety." Mary watched the flame rather than his mouth. It helped her keep her own face modest. "You have paper too," she said. "You have better paper." His hand went to his coat and withdrew. He did not unfold the letter. He laid it on the wood and pressed his fingertips over the seal as if thanking it for staying whole as long as it had. He swallowed. "She wrote your name," he said again, as if the sentence could steady him for the thing that must come after. Mary nodded. "She wrote what she heard," she said, "that they needed a small voice near theirs, that their hearts would not be taught by large speeches." He looked at her hand where it rested lightly on the back of the pew. His eyes had learned to hold back. He let them come closer now. "And what do you need?" he asked. She had not been asked that in years. She had not found language for it because language had been given other work. The question sat before her like a small, plain bowl. She set the simplest food in it. "I need them to be safe at the hour when a child is most afraid," she said. "I need not to be cast out for doing the thing their mother asked in the house she left. I need you to tell the truth with your voice, not only with your paper." He exhaled long. "I can do some of that," he said. "I will try to do all." He reached into his other pocket and drew out a thing Mary had never expected to see anywhere but on his hand. It was the Ravenswood signet, the heavy ring that had marked wax and men for generations. He had removed it. It made his fingers look unfamiliar. He did not kneel. He did not perform. He set the ring in her palm the way he had set the letter on the wood, careful and steady, as if placing a weight where it could be borne. "Not as a promise I have no right to ask for yet," he said, low, the words close to the skin between them. "As a trust. You hold what I guard. Guard me back if you will." The metal was cool and then warmed at once. Mary felt its circle press against the lines of her hand. It was too large. It would slide off any finger she might place it on. It seemed right that it could not be worn. She closed her fingers and felt the shape insist on itself. She lifted her eyes at last and let him see what the ring had done to her composure. "I will guard the children," she said. "I will guard what is right. I will guard what she asked. I will accept any scorn that comes on the way to that door, sir. But I will not be your excuse." He flinched as if she had laid a cool cloth on a burn. He had not known how much he wanted to be told that he could not use her courage to hide his reluctance. His shoulders eased. The truth had made the room simpler. "No," he said. "You shall not be my hiding place. Stand with me when I read it." "If you stand with the truth," she answered. It was not a condition. It was the measure they both would use. He nodded once, a vow more binding than many that had been shouted under vaulted ceilings. He looked at the ring in her hand again, then at the ribbons that lay on the pew from where she had tucked them out of Eliza's hair earlier. Blue faded to gentleness. He touched one with his finger. Only the ribbon, not her. "They are small," he said, and the helplessness in the sentence needed no answer. "They are small," she agreed, and that was why the house's large talk could not have the last word. The candle threw their shadows tall against the stone, two figures standing with a third between them that was only the distance they chose. Silence held a breath with them. Then he spoke again, a different thought in his voice. "Honoria will not yield," he said. "She will step back when she miscounts," Mary said. "If you make the count clear and public." She set the ring back on the pew for a moment and lifted the folded letter as if weighing it. "This says more than you can without shame. Let it speak." He smiled without mirth. "You think me a man who prefers paper to speech." "I think you a man who prefers order," she said. "Paper will give your words a chair." He laughed once then, softly, and the sound did not feel wrong in the church. He picked up the ring and placed it again in her palm, firmer. "Keep it until tomorrow," he said. "It will remind you I meant this." "I do not need reminding," she answered. But she closed her fingers around it and knew she would touch it when the night tried to tell her a different tale. He stepped back, as if the air had told him to make room for something else. She watched his face settle into the set it would wear in daylight when people thought they could read him. She felt the same happen in her own body, the rearrangement of muscles when a person who has been on a narrow ledge decides which way to turn. "Miss Fletcher," he said, and she heard the rank and the man in the same breath. "Will you stand with the children at the front when they are called?" "Yes," she said, "if you call me." "I will call you," he said, and the line of his mouth made it true. They stood without speaking for a while, allowing the candle to do its small, brave work. The stone gave back the tiny sound of wax softening. Somewhere outside, a fox scolded the cold. The house slept in its many closets, and then turned over in its dream, as houses do. Mary looked down at the ring again. She thought of the men who had worn it. of wax seals broken by women whose names did not travel as far as those men's horses went. She thought of a life made of small hours around large guests, and how those small hours were where vows were kept or not. She let the ring rest on the ribbon, a circle on a line. "You should sleep," he said, because he was used to giving orders when gentleness needed a shape. "You should too," she said, because she had learned to speak gently to men who had never been spoken to that way unless they were ill or infants. He made a small gesture of defeat. "I cannot." "Then sit," she said, "and count." She sat in the pew and left him the space beside her. He did not take it. He sat behind her, which is how a man sits when he means to be near without being seen near. She did not turn. She began quietly, the count that had steadied the house more than the house would admit. "1," she whispered on the breath in. "2," as it went out. She took him to 4 and back to 1. She heard, after a time, his breath obey. When the candle had burned down far enough to trouble the iron, he rose and pinched it out. The smell of wick and human warmth and old wood drew around them. In the dark, the letter lay like a small pale animal that would not run. They did not pick it up yet. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. They both stood. She put the ring back into her palm and closed her hand hard over it, imprinting a circle into the soft of her skin so she would still feel it when she opened her fingers for other work. He lifted the letter and slid it again into his inner coat, where it would lie against the beat in his chest. A thin bell sounded from the tower, not for them, but for the servants who would rise early to lay fires for guests who demanded them. It was the first note of morning, pulled too soon through the dark. Another bell answered from the stable yard, raw and practical, and then the house itself began to make its low, waking sounds, timber and pipes, and people remembering their tasks. They heard footsteps on the path outside. Voices, the cautious kind, that people use when they are important and early. The chapel doors creaked, footsteps and voices swelled. The aristocracy was entering for the Thanksgiving Mass. The chapel filled as it always did on feast days, with people who had come to be seen giving thanks and a few who had come to give it. Breath plumed faintly in the cold. The candles Canon Albright had set earlier sent up steady flames that did their best to warm a stone built to be honest with chill. The twins stood in the front pew, Eliza's ribbons smoothed, James's hair refusing to obey anyone. Mary kept a small half-step behind them, where children can feel a hand without having to hold it. Honoria shimmered into a place that let her see the prince and be seen by everyone else. Aunt Beatrice planted herself where the light from the east window fell on her knitting, like a benediction on wool. Lord Ashcombe took a pew with a view, as men do who like to watch the path their words will travel. Canon Albright began with the psalm that speaks of mercy, as if mercy were a handprint in snow. His voice was an old leather glove, smooth with use, strong in the seams. Edmund knelt when kneeling was required, stood when standing was, and did both with a steadiness that told Mary he had chosen his hour. He turned once and lifted 2 fingers. No one saw him, or everyone pretended not to. It was the smallest call, and it was enough. Mary moved forward so that she stood beside the children, visible and ordinary. Honoria's fan rose, then lowered as if remembering itself in a holy place. Ashcombe's mouth composed itself into patience. When the psalm had breathed itself empty, Edmund did not wait for the canon's sermon. He stepped out from the pew and walked to the lectern. He did not look at the congregation first. He looked at his children. Then he faced the room. "My friends," he said, "my family. Before we give thanks for any increase, we must set right what has been put crooked. The late princess, whose absence we feel in every room, spoke to us in her lifetime and left words for this hour." He took from his inner coat pocket the folded paper. His hand was steady as he broke the wax that had waited years for this morning. He read. He read the mother's request with a voice that did not ornament and did not apologize. The phrases sat cleanly in the space. "Let Mary Fletcher, the daughter of the schoolmistress, and a woman with clean hands, guide them in prayer in the nursery and at the hour before sleep. Let the canon guard doctrine, and Edmund guard the world. Let a gentler voice keep their hearts from breaking." A ripple moved through the pews, the sort a field makes when wind goes over it, and each blade thinks itself a tree. The Beecham sisters glanced at each other and then down, guilty for nothing and embarrassed. Honoria's face held, Only a tightening at the corner of her mouth betrayed a calculation turning to ash. Ashcombe's fingers pressed once against the bench, then released. A man adjusting himself to a chair he had thought built for his shape. Canon Albright stepped forward, without being asked. "I witnessed the writing," he said. "I knew the mind that wrote it. I stand by it." Edmund nodded in thanks and laid the letter on the lectern where anyone with eyes could see the seal and the date and the witness's name. He reached then for the second paper and held it up so that its smallness would not hide its weight. "Kindness has been offered to this house," he said. "A pledge to the chapel and the school, upon a condition. That condition being the right to guide the instruction of my children by a hand chosen not by their mother or their father, or their canon, but by the giver. We are grateful for generosity. We cannot purchase it with our children's hour before sleep." He read the lines plainly. "Donation pledged by Lord Ashcombe. Condition guidance of heirs' instruction. Amount 100 guineas per annum. To be considered." He set the slip beside the letter and looked at Ashcombe. He did not accuse. He did not hedge. "Ravenswood will honour humility over hunger for influence," he said. "We will take arms, but not leashes." A sound ran through the room, approval born of relief, disapproval born of thwarted appetite, and a quieter assent from people not used to hearing a man say a thing so simply. Ashcombe's mouth curved, as if he were listening to a child tell a story that would soon be corrected by adults. "Your Highness," he began, his tone not yet altering, "you mistake the nature of—" "I mistake less than you suppose," Edmund said, still calm. "What is proper will stand after truth is told. What is only convenient will not. Canon, please." Albright lifted his hand. "We will continue the service," he said, and then added, with a softness that struck more than any bark, "and we will do so with the children at peace in their places." Edmund turned to the twins. He did not move his lips in the customary way of parents telling children to be brave. He only inclined his head toward Mary. "James, Eliza, will you show our guests what your mother taught you?" James stood a fraction taller. Eliza's hand slid into Mary's without looking, then withdrew so she could fold them as she had been taught. They faced the front. Their voices, when they came, were small and clear, and not ashamed to be small. "Our Father," they said. Mary's whisper counted between their lines, not words, only the space that makes room for them. The room held still. Even the draughts behaved. The prayer rose up with the snow breath and hung in the beams, the way children's songs do when adults are reminded that they were children once. When they reached for ever and ever, the chapel seemed to have been waiting for it. Amen fell into the silence, as if a stone had been placed with care where a hole had been. Nothing dramatic happened. No window burst with light. Only Eliza's locket caught a candle's flame and returned it small and steady. Ashcombe did not object again. He was a man who knew when a room had turned. He bowed his head with a humility that fit him badly, and resolved himself to a different corridor later. Honoria closed her fan as if it were a promise she would keep to herself. Aunt Beatrice wiped her eye with a scrap of linen, and glared at anyone who might think to notice. Edmund lifted his face to the congregation. "We will give thanks now," he said, "for health and for home and for letters that love leaves behind when mouths can no longer speak. After the service, I will ask Miss Fletcher to remain in her place at my children's side, as she has been asked to do by their mother, and as I now ask her to do as their father." It would have been enough. He could have stopped there, and the house would have left with its story corrected. He did not stop. He looked at Mary as if the path he had found led only to this. "More," he said, and the word surprised him with how right it felt to say it aloud. "I would ask another thing. Not now, not in haste, but in the time a woman needs to decide what she will bind her life to. Miss Fletcher, if you can forgive my slowness and my mistakes, and if you can trust that I mean to hold this house to a braver standard than it has kept, will you consider being my wife?" He had not moved from the lectern. He did not reach for her. He did not make the request a spectacle. He asked as a man who knows that vows are work, and that work must be asked for without bargaining. Breath moved through the room with a sound like wind through dry grass. A few heads turned to look at Mary, as if surprise had made them children who had forgotten not to stare. Most eyes dropped, because people who value propriety are never so careful as when something true is spoken in front of them. Mary did not look at the faces. She looked at the children. James's chin lifted as if he had been told to stand straight and could not help showing the result. Eliza's eyes filled because 6-year-olds are terrible at keeping grown-up secrecy inside. Mary let her gaze travel then to Aunt Beatrice, who nodded once as if stitching had reached its corner and only needed a good tack. She looked at Canon Albright, whose mouth said wait and whose eyes said mercy. Lastly, she looked at the man who had read his wife's paper because he had the sense to be guided by the dead when the living are wrong. She lowered her head. Her voice, when it came, was for him and for the children and for the room in case the room needed it, but not for the gawkers in the back. "I will remain," she said. "I will keep the hours she asked me to keep. As for the other, I will consider what you ask me to consider, sir. I will ask God to make me wise." He bowed. Nothing theatrical, only the acknowledgement a man owes to a freedom he has no right to take for granted. "That is all I ask." Canon Albright, who had never minded sunlight when it fell in a good place, smiled openly then. "We will sing," he said, and set the congregation to the hymn that speaks of faithful hearts and steady light. Voices rose, better and worse together. Mary stood with the children and felt the ring in her closed hand warm again, a circle without a finger yet, a trust without a shape, not nothing and not everything. After the hymn, the service closed with the benediction that asks for peace to go with people who will go home and forget parts of what they have heard. The congregation bowed and rustled and began to break the spell by talking, because talking is how people handle hours that have done more than they expected. Aunt Beatrice rose and kissed Eliza's head as if no one were watching. The Beecham sisters decided to take the other door and walk through the yew, because gossip prefers fresh air. Honoria approached with the precise smile that a lady wears when she has not gotten what she wanted, but intends to be remembered as having behaved beautifully. "How moving," she said. "How very moving." She turned to Mary with a softness that did not often belong to her voice. "Miss Fletcher," she added, "the children's quiet did them credit." Mary inclined her head. "They taught themselves," she said, and did not apologize. Honoria's eyes flickered, then steadied. She looked at Edmund, and accepted with a nod the new shape of the house. She would live with it. She would manage within it. She would find good works to keep her hands occupied and her tongue from injury. Honoria was not a villain. She was a woman in love with the way things are. Today someone had shown her a different way. She did not like it. She did not fight it, not now. Ashcombe came last, because a man like him never comes first when the air is new. He bowed with exactly as much humility as a gentleman owes a prince in his own chapel. "Your Highness," he said. "Canon, Miss Fletcher." He turned the bow into a promise to be reasonable. "The diocese will be satisfied," he added, and if there was a stone under the flower of the sentence, he covered it with soil. "May the children thrive." "They will," Edmund said. Ashcombe's eye fell for a fraction on the papers at the lectern. He did not ask to see them. He had already read what mattered in the room's face. He turned and left, already folding this hour into a plan that would fail in smaller corridors than this one. The chapel began to empty. Boots on stone, silk on wood, a dozen conversations about weather born of people not knowing what else to say. The candles burned a little lower. The cold did not bite so sharply. Edmund came down from the lectern and stood with the children. He touched James's hair and Eliza's shoulder and let his hands drop. A man refusing to be sentimental when sentiment might undo the dignity he was trying to build for them. He looked at Mary and did not speak, because he had said enough, and she had answered enough, and some hours must be allowed to settle without being stirred again. Aunt Beatrice gathered her things, all flint and tenderness. "Lunch," she announced to no one in particular, which is how she announced things that saved families. "And afterward a walk. The air needs to learn the new story as well as the walls." Canon Albright blew out the candles near the rail and left those at the altar to burn to their ends. He touched the lectern once, a thanksgiving of the hand, and went to speak to a farmer about a calf in breach. Snow began outside as if it had been waiting for a sign. It came not in flurries that taunt and fade, but in a steady, thoughtful fall that covers without smothering. The coloured glass caught the white and made it tender. The children saw it and pressed to the door. Mary let them go and followed with the unhurried step that tells small bodies they have time. The prince stood a little apart and watched them, as if he were a man who has walked a long way and found at last a gate worth opening. He did not try the latch yet. He understood that gates must be opened in order, after one has thanked the field for being fenced and the neighbour for keeping his hedge clipped. In the quiet, after the last of the guests had gone out into the clean air, the chapel felt like a room that had been set back on its foundation after a slow tilt. Mary looked up once at the high beams and thought of the words that had been set under them. They would hold. She felt the ring warm in her palm and did not open her hand yet. She would later, when she put it somewhere sensible and safe. For now she held it as a token of a sentence spoken plainly on a winter morning. The house had heard it. So had she. They went out into the snow together, not in a procession, not in disorder, but as a family learning a new measure for its steps. The air was white and clean and quiet. The path to the door lay before them, ordinary and new. They married when winter had begun to loosen and the sea still held the colour of iron. The village church stood on a low rise beyond the dunes, its tower built stout against weather and gossip. Edmund chose it because it did not know how to be grand. Mary chose it because the door latch fit in a person's hand like a friend's fingers. They did not invite London. They invited the place where life had actually happened. The canon came in his usual coat and his best smile. Aunt Beatrice arrived wrapped to her ears and scolding the wind for daring to touch her joints. Mrs. Betton had cried twice the night before and sworn no one would see her do it again. Miss Lee brought a posy the twins had gathered, a miracle in that season, a cluster of snowdrops the gardener had bullied out of the ground with straw and stubbornness. The Beecham sisters sent a note expressing that they were delighted by propriety when it is charming, which made Aunt Beatrice laugh until she had to sit down. The twins walked before their father and Mary, solemn and important. James scattered crumbs of dried rosemary along the aisle because real petals were not to be had. Eliza held the little basket and the dignity of a duchess. The church smelled of wax and salt and borrowed flowers. Light ran along the pews like a hand feeling for familiar shapes. Edmund stood with the steadiness he had found in the chapel, and kept since, a steadiness taught by paper and by a woman's refusal to be his excuse. He wore no medals, only a simple coat that fit him as if it had been cut for the man he had become. Mary came on Aunt Beatrice's arm, the muslin she wore as plain as a prayer and as lovely. The only ornament was the ribbon at her waist, the exact blue of the nursery curtains. Eliza had insisted with both hands and all her heart. When Mary reached the step, Edmund did not reach out because they were being watched, and because self-control had become a kind of tenderness between them. He only looked at her as if processing a fact that pleased him beyond reason. She had arrived. The canon's voice filled the small space the way kindness fills a kitchen, without fuss and without hurry. "Love is stewardship," he said. "It is care taken and care received. It is not possession. It is the steady keeping of ours." He did not preach a long sermon. He spoke to two people who had already lived enough of one to know what the rest should say. Edmund took Mary's hand when the canon told him to. He had thought of this moment when sleep would not be bargained with. He had rehearsed a sentence and rejected 3. In the end, he said only what had cut a path between them. "Protocol is a fine coat," he said. "It is not a heart. I give you mine uncovered. I will guard you and the children and what is right in this house, with humility and without hiding behind you when courage is required." Mary's eyes shone and did not overflow. Her voice was steady, the voice that had put peace into 2 small chests on too many nights to count. "I will keep what you give me clean," she said. "I will guard you back. I will not let this house forget that small voices teach large truths. I will choose the simple rightness that does not make a spectacle of itself." The ring he placed on her finger had once stamped wax to make men behave. Edmund had taken the Ravenswood signet to the smith and asked for a band refashioned from its metal, the seal kept safe for paper and posterity, the circle worn where he could see it warm. The smith had obliged with a craftsman's pride and a lover's discretion. The band slid over Mary's knuckle and settled as if it had been waiting there all along. The weight surprised her. It was not heavy. It was present. The canon joined their hands with his own and blessed them with words that had soothed more frightened hearts than either of them would ever meet. He spoke the final sentence, and the sea made its own amen. Edmund leaned in and kissed Mary as a husband who has learned patience kisses his wife. Not too long, not too short, an acknowledgement of promise in front of eyes that would remember the truth of it later. The kiss deepened a heartbeat longer than Mary had braced for. not to test anyone's temper, but to tell her without words that joy had entered duty and intended to stay. Eliza let out a small, happy sound, half sob, half laugh, and ran to catch Mary's skirt. James tried to be manly and failed and came thundering after, his cheeks fierce with feeling. Edmund bent and scooped them both. Yes, both, because even a prince can carry the world when it is only 2 children. And Mary laid her hand over the tangle of arms. They stood like that, 4 people gathering themselves into a shape that would confuse those who preferred their lines neat and their lives separate. Then they put one another down gently, because gentleness was now a rule. Outside, the sea wind made ribbons of the women's veils. The village rang the bell not because it had been asked, but because someone had decided that gratitude was louder than weather. Aunt Beatrice tugged her shawl tighter and kissed Mary's cheek with a briskness that did not fool anyone. Mrs. Betton embraced her with a quick squeeze that pressed laugh and sob into one sound. Canon Albright shook Edmund's hand and then ignored forms completely and hugged Mary hard, whispering, "Your hands were clean. Keep them so. Keep his." Honoria did not attend. She sent a letter instead, folded neatly, and written with more honesty than most invitations had known. She wrote that she would remove herself to a house in Bath for a time, to organize relief for a foundling ward, with the same vigor she had once organized tables for supper. She added that she would return when she had learned a different way to be useful. Aunt Beatrice showed Mary the letter and did not add a single sharp remark. Some victories are softer in their edges than one expects. Ashcombe did not send anything. He had moved himself to other houses and other corridors. He was not finished with being himself. Men rarely are. But the diocese received no purse with its compliments, and the village school found a benefactress in a woman with clean hands and the prince's quiet backing. Sometimes influence learns to walk a new road without liking the stones. They celebrated in the simplest way possible. In the parlour at Ravenswood, the table held a round loaf, a pot of honey, a dish of butter that knew nothing of a banquet-height pyramid, and a roast that had been salted with good patience. The fire did the right thing. The children sat close enough to feel their parents' knees and far enough to feel important. Edmund carved with a soldier's economy. Mary spread honey on Eliza's bread and watched James concentrate on not spilling gravy with the attention adults rarely give anything but scandal. When dusk came, the snow began again, soft and deliberate. The house breathed. They took shawls and walked in the winter garden because Aunt Beatrice had declared that a married pair must let the air learn their new shape. The hedges held frost like lace. The chapel's small apse showed pale in the dim and seemed to nod at them as they passed. The children chased each other along the path and never ran too far. They had learned the measure of distance by watching people they loved lose and find it. In the quiet part of the garden where a low wall cut the wind, Edmund stopped and turned to Mary. No one watched them. No one would misunderstand what they did with their hands, and if someone did, that was no longer their business. He took her face between his palms, as if it were a book he had only just learned he could read aloud. She tipped her chin and met him. No count, no delay. The kiss came warm in cold air, a promise sealed on lips that had learned how to tell the truth and how to hold it when their mouths were shut. They drew apart with reluctance that did not apologize. He rested his forehead against hers. "I will fail again," he said, soft, because a man who has learned humility does not pretend otherwise. "But I will fail in the right direction. I will pull you back by the sleeve," she said. "And if I stumble, you will set me straight. The children will see us do it, and it will teach them more than any Latin lesson." He laughed and kissed her again because it seemed wrong not to be generous on such a day. Snow touched his hair and did not melt. Mary brushed it away with the back of her knuckles, and that small gesture undid him almost as much as the kiss had. Inside, evening gathered. They put the twins to bed with the measured count that had become family music. James fell asleep mid-number. Eliza insisted on reaching 4 and then surrendering. Mary laid the prayer book on the mantel because that is where it belonged, and because the sight of it there steadied the room in a way even fires cannot. Edmund stood behind her and slid his arms around her waist for the first time in a place that was theirs. She leaned back. The house did not mind. Houses reward people who do not lie in them. They sat together by the hearth when the children's breaths had settled. Edmund read aloud for the pleasure of his own voice, not to display his learning. Mary sewed a loose button because some symbols are not metaphors at all. They are practical, and that is their beauty. When he set the book aside, he took her hand and rubbed circles into the center of her palm, where the ring had left its soft mark that morning. He bent and kissed that little pale crescent. It felt like being blessed by something that had nothing to do with churches and everything to do with vows. Aunt Beatrice came to the door at some hour no person names and looked in, the way mothers do for the rest of their lives. She saw the two of them, his head tipped back, her hand on his shoulder, the prayer book on the mantel, and closed the door again, satisfied as a general who has counted her troops and found no one missing. Spring came into the garden one frost at a time. Ravenswood learned new paths for feet and for gossip. Honoria wrote of the foundling ward. Mary sent money in the prince's name and in her own, because she had been a foundling of a sort once, in a house with rooms too large to hold a girl's courage. The canon preached with the same worn-glove voice and married more people with more careful words. The twins grew and argued as if it were their profession, then apologized in a way that made the house keep forgiving humanity. The ring warmed to Mary's blood until it forgot it had once been cold. They went to the sea when summer made its case to the sky. The twins ran to the edge and let waves chase them. Edmund and Mary walked where the foam licked the shore and spoke like people who have worked already and will work more. He told her of a tenant's field. She told him of a child's fear. He told her of a petition that had wandered back without a signature. She told him of a prayer that had been learned without a word. He took her hand and held it differently, not like a promise that might be broken, but like a thing one keeps without having to grip. Now and then, in the evenings, Mary would open the princess's journals and read a page to herself, then close the book and lay it down with the care one gives to a quilt that holds too many memories to be washed often. She did not live in the past. She used it like a lamp when weather threatened. And when the house's talk grew heated, which it still did on most days that ended with Y, Edmund would take down the prayer book and set it on the mantel again, even if it already sat there, to remind everyone that the best things are simple and in plain sight, and that paper and prayer and clean hands build walls that keep out more than stone can. He would catch Mary's eye across a room and find it, and nod as if to himself. He had chosen truth over convenience one winter morning. He had been rewarded more than he had known a man could be, not with glory, which is a noisy thing, but with a wife and a house that held. To those who stood outside and guessed, their life looked very ordinary. Lessons, walks, mending, ledgers, a boy who would not keep his stockings from the puddle, a girl who would not keep her ribbon straight, a prince in his fields, a maid who had become his lady and had not changed her hands. To those inside it was a kingdom, modest and fierce. If you are listening, there in your own kitchen or your own street, you know what this story is telling you. Love is not a spectacle. It is a series of small braveries chosen in rooms where people prefer appearances. It is telling the truth when quiet would be easier. It is keeping your hands clean when other hands are reaching for levers. Protocol can make a person look proper. It cannot make a person good. When you are offered a ribbon with a leash tied to it, say no. When you are offered a letter that asks you to be better, say yes. And when two small voices need a gentler one to teach them how to breathe, be that voice. Even if the room is not built for you, courage is a steady flame. Hold it up. Others will find their way by it. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.